Perfect. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today we're going to be diving into the harmonization partnership between Farm Carbon Calculator, Cool Farm Tool and Agrecalc. And this is also part of SAI's Crops Carbon Toolbox Knowledge Share and Peer Learning series, where we look at topics that are of interest to SAI members in the realm of carbon and climate. And also just to say that obviously this is not limited to crops. It's, of course, a topic that's of interest to all of SAI's communities, whether it's crops, beef, or dairy, and that's why we've opened it up to the public. So we're very delighted to have all of you here with us today. And I will now jump into the formalities before we get into the fun part. So as always, with SAI Platform meetings, we want to make sure any meetings or webinars that we host do not result in any discussion, activity, or conduct that may infringe any applicable competition law. So if during the course of today's webinar, any member has any question regarding the legality of a proposed discussion, the subject discussion should stop immediately and not resume until the facilitator, myself, has raised the issue with Antitrust Counsel. So with that formality out of the way, we will jump into the exciting topics and speakers for today. So I'm your host, Denise Welch. I'm the Climate and Special Projects Manager at SAI Platform. I'm joined by my colleague, Lucia Garcia Perez, our Crops Manager, who most of you know. We're very delighted today to be joined by four esteemed speakers. So we have Liz Bowles, the Chief Executive Officer of Farm Carbon Toolkit. We have Megan McKerchar, Head of Science and Methods at the Cool Farm Alliance. We have Rachel Ramsey, the Head of Science at Agrecalc, and Kazuke Umizumi, the Responsible Procurement Manager of Suntory Europe Limited. So big thank you to all of our speakers for making time to be with us today. In terms of the agenda, so I'll just cover off another 30 seconds or so of housekeeping. We'll then have 10 minutes to hear from each of the organizations and their tool. So we'll start with Liz and then go into Megan and then Rachel. Then Liz, Megan, and Rachel will also take us on 10 minutes of what is the harmonization partnership, so the why and the how, which is really important. And then we'll hear from industry. So we have our SAI Crops member from Suntory Europe Limited, and Kazuki will talk to us about what this harmonization partnership means for their business. Obviously, at SAI, we like to hear what's going on in the industry, and it's also important to hear how this impacts our members. We'll then move into 15 minutes of questions. So Lucia and myself will pose a question to each of our speakers. And we'll finish today's webinar with 10 minutes of open Q&A from the audience. A little bit of housekeeping, just a reminder, all participants are on mute. You can send questions in the chat at any time. We will have, again, time for questions at the end. If you want to unmute yourself, we'll allow you to do that at the end. If you just want to send your questions in via chat, that's also fine. Please note, we don't accept AI note takers, so please keep that in mind. And always, as always, we will share the presentation and recording with SAI members after the webinar. Great. And now that we've gotten through the welcome and the formalities, I'd love to take us into a brief intro on each of these three organizations and their tools. And I'm delighted to start with Liz. So Liz, I'm going to hand over to you and you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Denise, and good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Farm Carbon Toolkit, our organisation, and our Farm Carbon Assessment Tool. So I'm Liz Bowles, as Denise said. I'm Chief Exec of the Farm Carbon Toolkit. I've been in post now for around 4 years. My background is very much that I'm an agriculturalist rather than a software specialist, and I'm also quite unusually a farmer as well. So that really helps me in this space because it means I've got an understanding of the kind of rationale and why farmers and growers might want to carry out their farm carbon assessment. Next slide, please, Denise. So a little bit about Farm Carbon Toolkit. We're a community interest company based in the UK. We were set up by farmers back in 2009, by farmers and for farmers. And for over the 15 years since, we're mission led, and our mission is all about supporting farmers, growers, and their customers to transition to more nature and climate positive farming systems. And we do that in two specific ways, which I'll describe to you now. So firstly, our advisors, and again, next slide, please, Denise. So as I said, we work with farmers, growers and their customers, whether that be processors or retailers or manufacturers. And we've got a team of specialist advisors who work directly with farmers and growers to help them on that transition journey, because we're very clear that simply producing a number doesn't necessarily result in a great deal of change. And I've just here listed some of the areas where we work with farmers, growers and their customers to help them on that journey. And you can see we also provide SBTI support for food businesses. Generally, we tend to do the work at farm level, the Scope 3 reporting for processors and retailers. Next slide, please, because I think this is probably the one that we're mostly interested in today. So we were quite early to this space of creating a farm carbon assessment tool. And back in 2010, when we created ours, we were very clear that we wanted to create a tool that would look at the whole farm, not just at product or enterprise emissions, but at the whole farm in terms of both emissions and sequestration. In the years since, we've amended our tool, or rather improved it, so that it can deal with both product and enterprise emissions. But increasingly now we're finding that our customers actually want to be able to look at whole farm. We've now got something like 15,000 active users across 4 continents, and we've made it really as easy as possible to use our calculator. And you can see on the right hand side of the screen that as you put data in each of the categories, it starts to build up that sort of donut picture of what the emissions are and where they're coming from. And I think probably the other thing I'd like to say is that in the last 2 or 3 years, we've developed an API function which enables other platform data to be moved into our calculator, and users can also request that their data or their footprint is sent on either to their customers or further along the supply chain. And we have the ability to actually look at the whole supply chain in order to bring all the information together in terms of emissions and sequestration. And the final thing I'd like to say about our tool is we're very clear that increasingly everybody wants more accurate data. And one of the biggest sources of variation is user variability. So just this spring, we've introduced farm carbon training, which is online training, which is tool agnostic, but which supports all users to be able really to more consistently use farm carbon assessment tools. And that's all I'd like to say, the time being, Denise, so I'll hand back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Liz. Very good to set the scene there. Now I'd like to invite Megan to take us through a little bit about the Cool Farm tool. Megan, over to you.
Thanks, Denise. If you want to go to the next slide. So Cool Farm, we're a science-led, not-for-profit membership organization, and we really operate across the supply chain. We host Cool Farm Tool and Cool Farm Platform. We build it to advance regenerative agriculture at scale. We have 44,000 users across the world in all continents, and over 18 million API calls. And for the past 15 years, we've really been, uniting food and beverage companies, NGOs, academics, farmer groups, and empowering the supply chain to standardize metrics. We don't just do carbon, we also do biodiversity and water. We are product-based. And the timeline at the bottom, you'll see we started off as an Excel tool back in 2008, 2009. And over the course of the past kind of 10 or so years, we've been adding new pathways, so beef, biodiversity, water, adding dairy modules. But the last 2 or 3 years, we've completely changed systems. We're moving house, so to speak. So if you go to the next slide, we're moving from Cool Farm Tool to Cool Farm Platform. The big difference in this is the quality of Cool Farm Platform. We have a lot of data check in place. Cool Farm Platform is assured by Carbon Trust for product footprints, and it produces like flag reports, aggregations for supply chains. It has like data quality checks. So if you put in numbers that seem strange, like not enough cows for the amount of milk produced, you'll get a warning. If things are completely not possible, like you've entered over 100%, you'll get a hard warning, things like that. Yes, so that's Cool Farm Platform. Move to the next slide, please. So our members, as mentioned, they really cover the breadth of the supply chain from agri inputs. So, Syngenta, for example, fertilizer companies, farmer groups, brands, Danone, Mars, consultancies, South Pole 3Q, for example. And the kind of intention of this is, yes, to provide a calculator so that people can measure and, create change, have decision points, know where to go. But also it doesn't just take one company to do that. You really need everyone in the supply chain to be on board to do it at scale. So we have this big tent ethos where we try and have these pre-competitive discussions. We have working groups. And the purpose of that is to share, peer-to-peer learning. How are people, motivating change within their supply chain? I think that's my last slide.
Yes, thank you so much. Very, very helpful to set the scene as well. And I'd like to invite now Rachel from Agrecalc just to give us a bit of a background on Agrecalc and your tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise, and delighted to be here as well. I'm Rachel, I'm Head of Science and Research for Agrecalc. So next slide, please, Denise, if you don't mind. So what is Agrecalc? Agrecalc, like the other tools on the call, we consider ourselves very much a science-backed farm carbon calculator. But we also consider ourselves to be a resource use and efficiency tool. And in fact, the rather odd spelling of our name is actually derives from the agrecalc is from resource efficiency. We help our users quantify, benchmark, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the supply chain. So essentially, we identify where emissions are coming from on your farm. We provide those emissions results at whole farm, enterprise, and product level. And we also highlight where there are opportunities to reduce costs and improve efficiencies, hopefully at the same time. Next slide, please, Denise. Thank you. Like the other tools who've presented before me, we've been around quite a while. Agrecalc started off in 2007 as initially essentially a small Excel-based tool that was developed by SRUC, Scotland's Regional College, along with their consultancy branch, SAC Consulting, essentially to calculate the carbon footprint of imported lamb from New Zealand at that time against Scottish produced lamb. We've grown arms and legs since then, essentially. We went online for public use in 2014. Since then, we've had quite the journey. We've grown significantly as a tool, as a company, until today, where since 2023, essentially, we've been a cloud-based online platform with API capability and interlinkage. We trade it as a few years, as you can see, as Agrecalc Limited, but now we're back fully owned by SRUC, now called Agrecalc, part of SRUC Innovation Limited. We're built on internationally recognised methodology, IPCC. We are tier 2 for the UK for all sources of emissions, whilst currently we're tier 1 for carbon removals. We're past 2050 compliant, and we are working towards carbon trust assurance against Greenhouse Gas Protocol, LSRS, SBTI flag, and also the ISO frameworks. Next slide, please, Denise. Thank you. So whilst we're operationally, our largest user base is in the UK, we have more than 15,000 plus anonymised farms and counting in our validated benchmark database. We also we work as well across multi-actors in the supply chain, everyone from farmers right across the supply chain, right up to financial institutions as well, we would consider as customers. And as I said, whilst our largest user base is the UK, next slide, please, Denise. Thank you. We also do have a presence somewhat globally as well, because we also not just support the agri-food supply chain industry, we also support research as well. So there's a number of our global presences also through not just agri-food supply chain projects, but also research projects as well. And I think that's my last slide, Denise. So I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. And before we move on, I just wanted to say that this is really helpful to have this background information. Obviously, we know that your tools have developed in different ways, probably for slightly different purposes. But at SAI Platform, of course, we really value this idea of pre-competitive collaboration. It's one of the reasons we're here. And so we really like this idea of highlighting where there's harmonization happening in the industry. And with that, I will hand over now to, I think it's Liz, to talk to us a little bit more about the how and the why of this partnership. So over to you, Liz.
Thank you very much, Denise. I'm actually going to sort of introduce the harmonisation piece and then hand over to Rachel and Megan to talk through the why and the how. But really, I think it's worth just, it's quite unusual this. Indeed, OECD is looking at different member states of OECD and what they're doing in terms of accounting for carbon within food and agricultural supply chains. And we're going to be a case study for them because I think we're the only example that's been found. But the reason why we have started working together, you really need to go back to the fact that there's a lot of use case requirements for carbon assessment tools. And all of us three calculators were set up probably for slightly different reasons to answer slightly different questions. And that's absolutely the reality of where greenhouse gas accounting has come from, that there was no agreed way of doing it. And indeed, although all of us are now aligned or certified to the required guidances and standards, we were all set up before these standards and guidances even existed. So we all predate all of that. And we were very aware that in the UK, there was a large number of calculators available, and there was a lot of concern from farmers, from supply chains, that they wanted to understand why they were getting different numbers. And we also, because all of us are very much in it for public good, is the fact that the reality of it was, how can we actually improve how we provide information in order to remove some of this distraction of different numbers to enable more people to start actually measuring something, because it was putting off quite a lot of people from doing anything at all. So we then started talking about how we could work together. And back in 2023, we started talking. And in 2024, we agreed to work pre-competitively together. And indeed, the offer was open to other carbon assessment tools, so long as they had a transparent methodology. And that was the critical bit, because if groups didn't have a transparent methodology, it's actually impossible to be able to talk about how you can potentially align those methodologies. And I would say since then that we've come together and we've been working now for 2.5 years. And the benefit is really the acceleration of learning about the intricacies of carbon accounting within food supply chains that really has been helpful, I think, for the whole industry in the UK. And I think that the final thing before I hand over to Rachel is just this fact that, and I've worked in agriculture all my life, I've never worked in a space where the requirements are changing quite as fast as in this space. Because, you know, it used to be that just having produced a carbon footprint was good enough. Now we want those footprints to be accurate, and we also want to have them validated. And that's quite a change. So I'm going to hand over now to Rachel, who's going to talk us through the why. Why did we do it in a bit more detail?
Perfect.
Fabulous. Sorry. Liz, thank you very much for providing that overview. So I'm just going to talk a bit about why we essentially decided to do this. As Liz has very well already articulated, it's actually a really good question when you think about it. Like, essentially, why did three, on paper, essentially competitive tools decide to work together? And I will caveat to say that, as Liz said, it is an open MOU as well. Other tools can join. But why did us three today decide to work together, essentially? Liz is very articulate, I think, as well, that we really consider we're doing this for the greater good. We care very much about farmers and supporting farmers. And I think we consider our starting point to be about industry trust at the end of the day. You know, ultimately, we care, we want to support farmers, we want to support the industry. And if we ourselves, or even our users, if our users can't see our methodology, they can't understand our methodology, they don't understand what assumptions we're making for our calculations or where our limitations are as tools, clearly, I think it's so difficult to have confidence in outputs. So for us, transparency was such a core foundational part of our harmonization initiative, was to be clear and transparent about our methodology so that we can align to start with. We also wanted to ensure that farmers and the supply chain businesses get value from their data as well. Often, as I'm sure a lot of people in this call know, the data burden can be quite high when you carry out a carbon assessment for any tool, actually. So often you're being asked to provide a lot of input data, whether that be for feeds, for fertilizer, for crop yields. So we want to also, as part of our harmonization initiative, to align our sources of data and our calculation approaches where we can, whilst also being conscious, of course, of farm data ownership, whilst easing provision of farm data into the supply chain as well. On consistency, we're working together on what we consider our pre-competitive core carbon footprint methodologies. And we're all, I think it's fair to say, we're all working towards alignment with the major international standards as well, which should ensure that the evidence being built now, regardless of which of the tools on this call you use, that should stand up going forward in terms of it as those assurance requirements evolve. Which brings me to the last point before I hand over to Megan, is that these requirements are evolving and often quite rapidly. Like we've saw within the last, I'm going to say 6 months, it's a bit more now, but we very quickly went from the land sector's removal guidance to the land sector's removal standard within the space of, you know, very rapid. So essentially, by harmonization initiative, we really just want to support our users to get ahead of these requirements and align where possible with their methodologies. I'm now going to hand over to Megan, who's going to tell us what essentially the how and what we've did so far.
Thanks, Rachel. So we kind of had friendly conversations. It didn't start with an MOU, but we realized to get it more, you know, official and to actually agree why are we having these conversations, where do we actually want to go, we signed an MOU, all three companies, and it's updated biannually with generally what are we trying to achieve with the partnership. We have an informal harmonization ethos So what that means is every 2 weeks we meet, we discuss challenges we're having, maybe new methods we're building, differences we're seeing if there's a new standard out, data sources, if there's a scientific reference that we can't seem to follow through or find the number in the paper, that kind of thing. So it can be very, very detailed conversations through to more kind of general interpretation of standards. And the purpose of that really is that transparency, scientific accuracy, consistency, and credibility, and, trust in assessments. And not just in the UK, I would say these learnings, we're a global calculator, they're not just specific to the UK. There are learnings across the globe. We have built a shared model. So the purchased embedded livestock emissions model was produced together. We use GLEAM FAO emission factors, and we agreed on the scope and produced a white paper and some communication about it. Some other things we've done at the very start of the partnership, we had a scoping workshop where we went in detail through each other's methodologies, worked out where there were differences or where we could align. We helped create the REEF initiative, which is Review of Evidence for Alternative Fertilizers, bit of a mouthful. And that's so that low carbon fertilizers have a template that they can go through. And that was we worked with Carbon Trust and a few other companies across the industry that should be going to consultancy soon, so other companies can see what the template is and feedback and refine it. So it's not quite finished yet. As mentioned, the new methodology, we are looking at what other methodologies we want to align on. We haven't yet agreed, I think, it's to be seen. And we also have the national level project, so UKRI Lunds project, which is a UK government funded project with academics and calculators, and there's the three tools are being used on various different farms, and from that you'll see on the next bullet point, we're learning a lot. So what are the divergent data inputs? And this, I think, is something certainly I have found really interesting, that we can have the same methods. So we quote IPCC, we quote the same emission factors, but actually because of the way our tools were built and the scope of our tools, the boundary of our tools, some of the assumptions, etc., we ask for data in a slightly different way. Not that it's wrong, it's just a different way of asking for it. And then those small changes can ladder up into something more meaningful, like a more significant difference. And that's so that's interesting. So same method, but ultimately the way the data is going in. And then that means if you are trying to harmonize and you are trying to have the same number coming out of the tool at the end of the day, you have to have the same number going in. And if you have lots of tools that you're trying to like retroactively harmonize, you end up kind of going to the simplest term and you lose a lot of data resolution in that. So the quality of the numbers decreases. So there's a trade-off there that, that exists. And I would say through this, we're engaging with farmers, government, and the agri-food industry and the supply chain to, really understand what the impact of that is, and how, where are the key places that we need to harmonize. It's an iterative process. So we, as I said, we're meeting every 2 weeks and we decide the initiatives that we're working on. As that goes, we make sure we try and focus on the highest impacting methodologies and technologies. But we try and keep flexible. So if somebody has like a needly question, we will bring it up in the meeting. So there's not really anything off topic. I think that's it. I'll hand over to Denise.
Thank you so much, Megan and Rachel and Liz. That's really, really helpful. And again, you've limited it to 2 slides, but honestly, I can imagine that you could talk for hours and hours about all the work that's going on in the background. So really appreciate that you are sharing that with this audience. I'm very pleased now to hand it over to our colleague from Suntory Europe to talk to us a little bit about this from the perspective of the user. So coming from the industry and how this impacts them. So Kaizuki, over to you.
Thank you very much, Denise. I'm Keisuke from Suntory Europe. I'm in charge of procurement for sustainable sourcing for Suntory ingredients. And I'm very happy to be here to talk about the benefits of such harmonization between three parties. Let me talk a little about our company introductions, and then let me talk about the benefits. As you can see in this slide, we have a variety of products from healthcare supplements, soft drinks, and I believe some of you are familiar with our brands Orangina, Oasis, Lucozade, and Ribena. And in terms of alcohol beverages, we sell some cocktail RTD drinks, beer, gin, Japanese whiskey, bourbon whiskey, and Scottish whiskies, and somehow we sell wines. Yes, thank you. Next, please. And this is consolidated revenue of Suntory without liquor tax. The total revenue is around $20 billion, and still the majority of it comes from Japan. But we sell in US, Europe, and Asia Pacific as well. Next, please. And as you can see, we have multifaceted beverage products, and as a leading company in Japan, we have taken a lot of activities for sustainability in nature and people. In terms of nature, we have taken some water stewardship, water replenishment projects in several countries. And in terms of containers and packaging, we have taken some circular economy and sustainable packaging. And for the climate actions, we have doing we have been doing some regenerative projects to reduce GHG emissions, and also we are very keen to responsible sourcing of our ingredients. In terms of people, we have taken some activities for healthcare, human rights, and somehow enriching lives of people. Next, please. And so let me talk a little about our supply chains. We have a lot of ingredients, agricultural products, but we mainly source not from farmers directly, but from cooperatives or malting companies, sugar producers, or a kind of middleman. Next, please. And because of such features of our sourcing, we change our ways of regenerative agriculture projects depending on features of ingredients and regions. Our policy is the right method in the right place. Uh, these pictures are one of our project farms. Wheat for whiskey, tea leaves for our soft drinks, corns for whiskey, sugar beet, and coffee beans. we differentiate the ways of project or landscape approaches or individual or regenerative projects. And also, we sometimes develop such project from scratch or we write onto the existing project. We have the same numbers of ways as that of projects. Next, please. Therefore, we have faced several challenges in accelerations of regenerative agriculture. The first challenge is different GHG calculation methodologies. Uh, a variety of ways means a variety of GHG calculation methodologies. Collecting primary data is quite important for robust reporting. However, calculation formulae are different in each tool, even with some black boxes, which makes it difficult to keep consistency. This is just an example of figures from 68, 82, and 74. And as Liz explained, even though we use the same source of data, we will gain the different figures depending on the calculation tool. This is a quite significant challenge for us. Next, please. The second challenge is, especially due to the first one, we often find difficulty in collaborating with other companies having different MRB requirements. Each private company has its own GHG calculation policy. They might want to keep consistency of data, which makes difficult for us to collaborate with other companies requiring different GHG calculation and MRB. Next, please. I fully understand MRB is important process. However, private companies desire simple, universal, and consistent calculation tools. Therefore, we welcome this harmonization for our simplification of MRB process. Next, please. Let me talk about the actual benefits from this harmonization. The first one is consistent GHG reporting from different crops. Let me take the example of our regenerative project in UK. We use Cool Farm tool for our blackcurrant project. And we use Farm Carbon Toolkit and Cool Farm tool for Molting Valley, depending on our partner companies and projects. And thanks to this harmonization, we can assure easily consistency for such different crops, and we can be more confident to publish our GHG data. Next, please. Also, thanks to this harmonization, we can gain easier collaboration opportunities with other companies. This harmonization will mitigate difficulty collaborating with other companies using these tools. And as I said, we use Cool Farm tool and Farm Carbon Toolkit. But if some companies use AgriCalc, maybe it could be easy to collaborate all together thanks to the same calculation methodology with more transparency. And thanks to such more open opportunities, we could have bigger opportunities to make our project more efficient and to reduce costs. That's all, and thank you very much. And I'm happy to take your questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kizuki. And yeah, it's really great that you mentioned this concept of efficiency and reduced cost. I think hearing this voice from the industry is important because we know that companies are busy. People have to do a lot of tasks, and they don't want to have to think all the time deeply about the transparency behind the calculations, or is this credible or not? And I think you really hit some very important points. Um, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I think what we can do is we'll move into a round table of questions. And basically, I would like to ask my colleague Lucia to kick us off with the first question. Go ahead, Lucia.
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask the first question to Liz. Um, so Liz, this harmonization project is a big pioneering endeavor for your organization. Would you say the benefits of the outcomes of this harmonization project outweigh the risks associated with undergoing something like this?
Thank you, Lucia, for the question. Do you know what? When we first started, I don't really think we thought it was that pioneering. I think we thought it seemed really sensible to all of us and almost a bit of a no-brainer. And actually, I would definitely say it's more of a benefit for all sorts of reasons. I think it's pre-competitive, but probably the biggest benefit is the fact that all our three organisations, which have got really similar ethoses, we're able to sit down and learn together. And I think what that's doing is it's benefiting certainly all our calculators, but probably the whole of the UK supply chain, because it means we can make faster progress than we could have made on our own. And I think that's the biggest benefit of us working together. And I just reiterate again that we were all created, all our tools were created before any of these standards ever came out. And I think because we were created for different reasons, it's not surprising that we end up with different numbers. But what we're doing now is where we can, and both Megan and Rachel really spoke to that brilliantly, is we're aligning our methodologies so that in future, the variation will get less. We don't believe it will disappear simply because we're asking slightly different questions, but it will get less. And I think a brilliant example is the fact that we've all now got the same approach for dealing with the embedded emissions when a farmer buys livestock, because that wasn't there before. So it's a really good concrete example of an improvement. And I think this will also help us in this increasing requirement for more accurate data, because it's not good enough now just to have done a footprint. Yes, the farmers, customers and supply chains actually want the numbers because they want to use them. So yeah, thanks, Lucia.
Thanks, Liz.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Liz. That's really helpful because it leads into my next question, talking about, the consistency and the collaboration. Megan, this question's for you is, how do you see this partnership ensuring modeling accuracy and consistency in line with industry requirements?
Yeah, so as mentioned, we meet every 2 weeks and we talk about assumptions, limitations, challenges. And let's take IPCC, for example. That was built to account for national inventories. It wasn't built for product or farm assessments. That wasn't the initial purpose. So when you're reading through those the guidelines, there's different ways you can interpret things, like what should be in scope, what shouldn't be in scope, what should you use the default, what if the user doesn't provide data and IPCC doesn't give a default. Like those types of questions we can align on. And if I give a real example, Co-Farm are currently building a new method. Farm Carbon Toolkit have this method already, and I'm saying to them, can I give you some inputs? And we put the same inputs into our methods and see, are we going to get the same results? And that can work because the method is brand new. We're not kind of stuck on an old method that we're kind of tied to because we built it 10 years ago. So for new methods, it absolutely, and the purchased embedded emissions is a good example. IDF in their recommendations, they have, or standard, I think it is. Is it a standard, Rachel? IDF? Forgotten now.
I think it's a standard.
guideline. Is it a standard? IDF have.
Maybe.
Yeah, IDF give what are the sources of emissions that need to be included. One of them is purchased livestock when they're moving between farms as a scope 3. None of the tools had that, but how do we do that? And we went through, and it took time. We took about 18 months deciding when should it be used. It shouldn't be used for flying herds, for example. And the white paper that we produced gives case studies, like examples where you do use it, where you don't use it. And then also, we're producing the same numbers. So there's, really alignment there. And then, other examples like LSRS, are we interpreting that the same way? We're waiting for the guidance, but there's still nuance in maybe how you can define the type of SOC modeling calibration they're talking about. And we can have those in detail debates with people in the exact same position as ourselves. And it's invaluable, absolutely invaluable to have that transparency, that scientific, critique. You've got someone else that also just wants the same numbers, and there's no commercial like, oh, I can't tell you that because that's proprietary knowledge. So it's yeah, a very, very valuable partnership.
Great. And sort of leading off that thought, Megan, around transparency. Rachel, I wanted to ask you, at a very high level, this alignment between calculators makes a lot of sense. But however, at the end, what does that collective implementation success look like to you?
Thanks, Lucia. It's a great question. As both Megan and Liz have said as well, our tools have been around a long time, and I think both Liz and Megan and myself have articulated some of the challenges that poses as well to retroactively, look at alignment. Our tools have all been built for different use cases, so to greater or lesser degrees, there might be slight differences in structural hierarchy, boundaries, assumptions being made. And also, as I think it was Megan said, there's, potential, not just challenges to work around the different tool nuances and quirks, as I'm going to call them, but also potentially we don't want there to be a negative trade-off and that we lose kind of data resolution or granularity as well. So within that, so we're targeting those really key areas of alignment as well. So I think for us, as going back to that kind of idea of transparency as well, is like the collective success. It looks like a scenario essentially where, say, a farmer enters their data into one of our tools, and because of methodological alignment and transparency of that methodology that we're working towards, essentially that number is trusted and accepted across multiple supply chains. So from farmers, retailers, processors, sustainability managers, that they have confidence and acceptance in our respective tool outputs. They know the methodology is transparent, it's robust, it's aligned with international standards, and they can take confident steps to reduce emissions based on that. I just want to sort of reiterate, I think both Meg and Liz have said this as well, but just because of those quirks and nuances, that we don't necessarily believe as part of our partnership that we will ever necessarily achieve the same number. But what we are trying to achieve, hopefully, is that there might be a consistent divergence between tools for an output. And that the key thing is that because of transparency, that we will be able to completely explain why that divergence remains. So yeah, thanks, Lucia, for the question.
Thanks, Rachel.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and speaking about data, I think this leads into the last question we have here. This is for you, Keizuke. You mentioned in your presentation the importance of primary data. So my question for you is, how can this harmonization of calculators simplify the Scope 3 data collection and reporting process for Suntory?
Thank you for these questions. The answer is simplifications of our internal process. As I mentioned, we purchase a variety of ingredients and we need to adjust each data to assure consistency on the same calculation policy. Normally, it involves a third-party auditor to verify such methodologies, and we need to gather information such as calculation formulae, boundary, example case figures, and so on. We often find challenges in this process because all the calculation formulae are complicated and sometimes all the information are not open in public. If we can do such same process with these three calculators of you, we can minimize this process as this calculator has already aligned with one another on the basic calculation with transparency. Yes, that's all.
Great. Thank you so much. That's perfect. And it leads me into the fact that we have now some time for audience questions. And I believe there's already been several put into the Q&A box. So Lucia, do you want to take it away?
Yes, yeah. So we've got one from Quentin. Thanks for your question. So, are you aware of or involved in similar initiatives that are outside of the UK aimed at aligning carbon accounting tool methodologies?
I will maybe just quickly say, so CoFarm is not a UK tool, just to be clear. We're based in UK, but we're a global tool. We are compared very often to other methodologies across the world. Our members will sometimes they'll do an assessment in one tool and CoFarm and get different numbers, and then we'll have to look at the methodologies and try and understand why those differences occur. But in terms of a pre-competitive MOU, no. I know of lots of tool comparison projects, informal and formal ones, but not one where people sit around and regularly and try and work together to harmonize. There are working groups, GHG protocol has a working group for LSRS and things like that. And of course, there's some sort of, how they're interpreting LSRS, but I don't know of a partnership like ours anywhere else. I don't know, Rachel, Liz, if you do.
I think as far as I'm aware, and I'm going to go back to, I think it was Liz made this comment at the very start, that just a wee additional comment to what Megan said, like we are very open and transparent about what we are doing as part of this initiative. So we do have engagement with others who are interested, and one of those interested parties is the OECD. And I know we've all had engagement with the OECD, discussing, some of the, as we've said in this call, some of the challenges and opportunities and benefits that we've experienced in this last 2.5 years of working really closely together. And we know that OECD has looked at, I'm going to get these countries wrong, aren't I? I think it was Germany and New Zealand. They did like a trial to look at essentially harmonization of tools. So certainly, like we're more than happy to feed our experience to others like the OECD. And Liz and Megan, I don't know if you want to add further comment to that as well.
No, I'm just going to agree with you, Rachel. I think the reason that we're going to be a case study within the OECD report is the fact that the author couldn't find any other examples across 39 OECD countries. Yeah.
Yep.
Great, thank you. And then the next question from Duncan. One of the biggest challenges that a lot of our members at SAI Platform are facing is the inventory versus project-based accounting and understanding impact of various actions. Is there any way that this harmonization process could help with this?
I would say, if I make a quick start on this one, I would say yes. And thank you, Duncan, for the question. I mean, what the biggest challenge of all on actual farm carbon accounting is accounting for changes in emissions where farmers are making changes which will reduce their emissions, because anything that's inventory based is always working behindhand because they're working on averages rather than what's going on farm. So, and what we're doing, and Megan mentioned reef, and we're also doing it individually, is that we are working to better account for the better practices that farmers are undertaking. So therefore, that means that if a farmer is doing something, it will show the impact of that compared to farmers that aren't, whereas inventory based cannot do that. At least it can't at the moment.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, and then our next question is from Bradley. It is understandable that companies are willing to reduce emphasis on the MRV to favour simplicity. Is there a tolerance threshold where companies could become uncomfortable when models are too far off? Or is there an overriding satisfaction that the positive management practices are being implemented, even if the expected outcomes may not be fully realised? So I guess this is the trade-off between you're doing action, but you don't feel comfortable with measuring it.
Maybe I should answer these questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yes, my answer is no. The issue is the complexity, but a kind of black boxes and different methodologies in each calculation tool. Maybe complexity is somehow necessary to keep robustness of each project, each calculation tool. So main point is different methodology and somehow black boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think maybe we have time for this final question. This is from Bill. Are Farm Carbon Toolkit and Agrecalc also looking to expand their assessment protocol to include other parameters, such as water and biodiversity? And if so, will the aim be to work from the outset towards harmonisation, I guess, with what the Cool Farm tool already has in place?
Oh,
Great
shall we
question, Bill. Go for it,
It
Rachel.
is. I was going to say I'll try and be succinct just for time, but I think for us, and Liz, I'm not going to speak for you, I'll let you speak of this, but I think our ethoses are very similar across organisations because we do want to support the farmer. I think we're very cognizant that there is a danger of carbon myopia, as it's called these days. I think it's a term. So we are very aware of the idea and potential to have a more holistic farm carbon assessment. So for us, certainly that is something we're very mindful for. I speak specifically as Agrecalc, I'll let Liz comment on FCT, that we would eventually like to include other metrics such as biodiversity as well. So I would say it's currently out of scope of our current work, but at the moment it's certainly something that we are mindful of. And Liz, I'm conscious of time, so I'll hand directly to you.
I'll very quickly just say that we already do account for water within our calculator where that leads to emissions.
Yes.
But
yeah.
actually, I mean, Rachel's absolutely right. It's out of scope at the moment, and it feels like the job that we set ourselves is probably big enough for the time being. And I also think that we are getting much cleverer at being able to ingest data from other sources and don't necessarily need to have everything on our platform. And certainly our way through this is to work with the best partners possible for things like biodiversity. I mean, biodiversity is a really complicated one to measure well. And I think everybody is a long way off yet having even a good enough tool, let alone, I mean, we're not even worried about a perfect tool. Good enough would be great. But never say never, because, this is moving very fast.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think
Denise,
we could do one more question and just we go 30 seconds over? Okay. The last question is about the tropicalization of these tools. Who would like to speak to that about the use of these tools in tropical areas?
Oh, right. Well, I'll start because ours isn't a global tool. But actually we do have the ability to make versions for different parts of the world. And typically that's where there's a demand for it, we can do it. And we've kind of dipped our toe into the water with one closer to home foreign version, and we're very happy to do that. And effectively what we have to do is look at the emissions factors for different countries, different farming practices, as well as really silly things like the names for inputs in different languages. There's a whole range of things you have to do, but none of them are insurmountable.
I'm just going to very quickly say we have a similar approach and then hand directly to Megan.
Yeah. We have emission factors, and for some models we use weather data, so it can be used in tropical climates. Some emission factors are country-based, like electricity. Our cattle models, for example, are based off like what the animal eats, and it's more specific to the herd than it is to, there is some climate zone stuff in there as well, but it's built in a way that it's flexible, that it can be used in different countries, that it's country agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I apologize, we're 1 minute over, and I think we could speak for hours on these topics. It was really, really, really nice to have all of you here. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for your really brilliant questions. We'll share the recording, and we look forward to more such discussions. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful evening, wonderful morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.